Welcome to Reputation Revolution. This is the podcast where we help individuals like you to establish your voice in the marketplace, enhance the credibility of that voice, extend the reach of your story and your message, and finally, extract value from your efforts in building a meaningful personal brand that's both recognized and respected. Now, on with the show.
Alrighty, welcome back to the Reputation Revolution podcast. My name is Trevor Young. Great to have your company. We're going to try something a little bit different today. I've got with me my new partner in crime. His name is Brendan Keogh. G'day, Brendan.
Trevor, listeners, how are you?
Now, just quickly about Brendan, you may have, if you're a regular listener, he was on episode 221, which was the first episode for season number 6, which we're in now, along with Sam Osborne, and we talked about the vexed question of personal brand versus business brand. So we had a good virtual panel discussion on that. But I want to get Brendan back in. Brendan does a lot of content strategist for thought leaders and speakers and authors. He also runs a business around audio called Podcast Pro, so you can check him out at podcastpro.com.au. But we're going to review previous episodes because we've got some fantastic guests on and we get them in for 45, 50 minutes, and I dissected them as much as possible, but we want to dissect them a little bit more and have a recap and a discussion and where there's some action points that you guys can maybe, if there's interest there, to go off and do something based on what that previous guest was talking about. So this is the first one of these, so please bear with us. But we're doing it off the back of last week's episode with Oscar Trimboli, and that was episode 226, how to build a global business around your professional personal brand. It was a case study. It was one of my favourites, all-time favourites, to dig into this because Oscar's doing everything right. So we're going to unpack what Oscar was talking about. Brendan's listened to it as well, and I clearly did the interview. So we're going to recap it. But if you haven't gone and listened to it, definitely do listen to it. And hopefully this episode will spark a bit more interest to go back and check it out if you haven't already done so. Brendan, you listened to the Oscar interview. What was your first sort of thinking as you were listening to it?
Trevor, thanks very much. Great to be here. Hello to your listeners. This is a great format, a great opportunity to deep dive into podcasts. We're often listen while we're busy doing other things, walking, what have you. But to be asked to listen and recap on this and such great content, full disclosure, I've done a little bit of work with Oscar in the past. I was very excited to dive into this, your chat with him.
Which I didn't know that, by the way.
Yeah. So forgive the listeners if I'm looking at notes because that was just such a great opportunity to physically take notes, stop, rewind, really delve into and take action from this great content. The first overarching thought was the power of content. It obviously was a case study that embodied your methodology. But he's a guy who was very high up at Microsoft, marketing director, I believe, very capable, obviously doing great in that role, and has pivoted to being a world-class listening expert, not by education or a job title or anything like that, but basically by the power of the content that he's created. So to change and reposition yourself and at such a high level, purely through the diligence of his work and putting content out there to be that expert is just a classic case study in how powerful producing content is.
Now, let's unpack that a little bit, Brendan, because as you said, he was a corporate guy. He was in Microsoft. That was his space. And then I'm not going to tell that story. He tells the story in the interview, how he pivoted or how he actually worked out that, he's not bad at this listening caper, which you don't kind of wake up and say, hey, I'm a good listener. I can, teach people how to do this. But what I really loved about it was, A, the story about how he did it, but B, that he took it on. He had a crack. And so he's been doing this for 10 years and, it's a 10-year overnight success, as they say in the trades. But his first 2 years, he was creating a lot of content, but he reckoned it was absolute rubbish, which I found interesting.
I love that bit too. And he's, that was around, he was going niche in terms of his messaging to that under less than 1% of who were looking to be world class. And so to understand that he had to go broader and much more practical about what his listeners' day-to-day challenges. So now he creates content very specific around things like how to listen in a Zoom meeting, these kind of very helpful practical guides and resources and whether it's about that webinar or that episode of the podcast. So, we can go a bit broad.
Yeah, what he was saying too is his first lot of content for 2 years rings a bell, that he focused on the positive aspects of listening, which, as you would, but it wasn't getting any traction because he wasn't talking to their problem. As he was saying, I was talking to my hypothetical solution. So that the lesson there really is to understand your audience and talk about, address their issues and challenges and problems. Now, look, he's an expert, and there are people who are thought leaders who, they probably don't do as much utility content, and they can change the way people think about a topic or an issue by putting out their ideas and their insights and their theories. And so we've got to be aware that there's a bit of a balance between the two. But I always think the very best place to start if you're going to go out with content is understand your audience, what are their pain points or challenges and everything like that, and address those. That's probably the easy wins. Then you can start getting into, because I'm a really positive guy and I like the aspirations and the dreams. We can focus on the fears all we like, but what inspires people as well. But it really worked. And what Oscar talked about is he came across a book called Selfish, Scared and Stupid by Karen Flanagan and Dan Gregory, two Australian authors. And what he took out of that was how people relate to negative consequences much quicker. So that's when he started creating that content that talked to those challenges and barriers people faced when listening. So that's clearly a good lesson there, Brendan.
Absolutely, and it is tempting to talk about our solutions. We've got this sorted, and here's how we can help. And particularly that positive solution aspect. But fascinating I guess about reinforces his listening focus. It's about what's the customer thinking, what's my audience thinking about, and almost like you're hearing the customer's pain points. Just a really good reminder to not get ahead of ourselves, really to demonstrate we've heard what our audience is struggling with, then the solution can flow from there.
So by doing research too, which is Oscar's very big into, he created what he called, he defined 4 personas, and he calls them the 4 villains of listening. And then he created a quiz or an assessment tool around that. They've been the mainstays of his personal brand journey and the business side of things. What did you take out of that side of things, the 4 villains of listening, the personas? So again, having your personas, but then creating a quiz or an assessment tool that is interactive, and that's content. We forget that a quiz is content. And it makes people interactive. And when they people have to download it. He said that 18,000 people have downloaded that tool, and that is actually the incentive to get them as an email subscriber. And he did say that 50% of those who have downloaded it are opening up his email list. So I gather from that he's got 18,000 on the list, and something like half of that, pretty impressive open rate, is they're opening his emails. Very powerful.
It's so engaging, such a great way to engage, get people involved. It's so active, versus here's I'll send you my ebook, which you then have to read. This is again focused on the customer, and they're going through thinking about what's relevant to them. What does this mean for them? They'd get some results or recommendations at the end of that, so there's kind of a call to action to move forward. So it ticks so many boxes. So it's a really a great component that people could be looking at in any kind of business. I mean, if you can apply it to listening, then you can apply it to lots of other aspects, I reckon.
That's right. That's absolutely right. So if you're creating content and you're wanting to up your game in that space, create a quiz. And if it's a good quiz and there's a bit of meat to it, and have it download this quiz or this assessment tool. I think assessment tool sounds better. And get the email address for it, and then you're building your subscriber
it's something
list.
That would be very shareable, I'd imagine. It sounds like it would be interesting that people would show their friends or their colleagues or relevant people. So it's the gift that keeps on giving.
I think, and just before we move on to other elements of it, but I think that just content's fantastic and getting people engaged. I mean, at least with podcasting, they're listening over a period of time. Blog articles they're reading, social they're reading, and video they're watching. There's a degree of engagement, but there's nothing like checking boxes or writing. This is filling out a quiz for engagement, and of course that deepens that level of connection that they have with the creator. So
and it's about me, Trevor. It's my responses. It's not just taking on board your information, which is obviously great, and I'm interested. But it's my story, my aspect. So it's very, very powerful.
Well, it's learning too in online courses. A lot of the online course platforms now have those quiz elements to it because it's leaned forward, isn't it? A lot of content's leaning back and taking it in. But when you have to do something, then it's a lean forward type of content. So a couple of things that we're going to look at is the owned media channel. So I want to go back a couple of steps. So you did mention at the outset that my methodology, the credible authority, and I think that Oscar is truly a credible authority. I said to him that, this is my methodology, and he's actually done it without even knowing anything about it. So, which makes me feel good because it's on the right track. But the methodology, as I will often say here on the podcast, is you've got to, empower your voice, which is your positioning and your getting out, understanding the roadblocks that might be holding you back. So getting yourself in the right mindset. Then you've got enhance the credibility of your voice, which is the content you create and the channels that you use to distribute that content. Then we have extend the reach of your voice, which is the earned media side, whether it's being on other people's podcasts or going out to the media or writing a guest post for someone or an opinion piece for your industry trade journal, and then extract the value from the profile and the reputation that you build, which is the commercialization and seeing the opportunities that are out there, which Oscar's done all of those. He's ticked all of those. So let's, I think the first part about the mindset and getting out there and doing it and overcoming any roadblocks, he's clearly done that. He's positioned himself around the listening side of things. He knew there was only one expert in that space really that was recognised globally when he started. So he knew about that person, and they were in a sort of a different listening space. I think they were more in the audio space. So that was quite interesting. But the owned media channels, which people are probably sick of me banging on about, but you can bang on about it as well. That's the important one. That's you're becoming your own media company. You're building it from scratch, and you're getting that content out there. He's gone with his 1-2 punch. There is podcast, and he's done 100 episodes, and he's got a podcast producer helping him with that. And he's got a companion newsletter that goes out alongside that. He was interesting. I pressed him on, have you got a blog? But he doesn't blog. But he does, his other channel is LinkedIn, which he's done a lot of over the past, in past years. And he is on Twitter, but I think it's a bit more of a distribution tool for him. He's got a few thousand followers on Twitter, but he's much bigger on LinkedIn. So if you look at that, he's got which I think is a really nice combination of podcast, which really works well for him and what he does. So I think he's picked the right channel there. He's got the newsletter because he's got why wouldn't you have a newsletter that's going out to 18,000 people? He's got LinkedIn, which he's always creating good content, because that's what he's got, is good content. And then Twitter as an extra channel. How do you like them apples?
Well, what it came through was his focus on simplicity. So not trying to do too many, be across too many platforms. He just said, I think he said doesn't have the bandwidth for too many things. So, which I think is fantastic, and I think it's a good place. It's comforting for people, whether you're starting out or trying to grow your authority. To not try and spread yourself too thin. It's too daunting. And so if you can really nail a few platforms, that you're going to have a better quality output. You're going to enjoy it more. It's more sustainable. So I really like that aspect. Interesting how he didn't choose podcasting first. He had the newsletter, and it was only listening to feedback that someone said, "Why are you doing this? You should be doing a podcast." And so you don't be stuck. I don't think you've got to get it right, or you're only I've done this and that's it. You can adapt, evolve, bring in new aspects, and I think the part for that, Trevor, was something you often talk about, and I'm very passionate about too, is that repurposing aspect. So, as you're thinking, what could be your lead, your headline piece or platform, and then how can you repurpose the content, the great stuff from that, leverage it, make sure more people have other avenues to hear it. So that's where the podcast could be a great way. I think Oscar did say that his newsletter is very closely related to the podcast. It might not be direct stories from it, but it would relate heavily. But someone starting out can start a podcast, get the transcript, get a couple of articles out of that for their newsletter. So, work smarter, not harder.
Yeah, and I say that a lot for particularly people when they're starting out or they're re-energizing their content efforts. You have your one big owned media channel first that kind of you throw everything in. I always think it's good to have the email side of things, because that continues on that conversation. But having a 1-2 punch like that is doable. It can be focused, and because the content is pretty, as I understand it, the newsletter supports the podcast. Then he's not, going back to the well and trying to reinvent the wheel every time. Just also talking about on LinkedIn, I just looked back at my notes. His focus is on LinkedIn. He's got 15,700 followers, so a really good following there. He's global. And what he did say was he improved his voice through writing on LinkedIn. So, you do not find your voice just willy-nilly. It takes time, and writing is the best way to do that, I find. What do you reckon?
No, absolutely. He said himself that it wasn't the greatest content that he started when he started, but over time he's found his voice. He also found his voice by being a guest on other people's podcasts, and so having that chance to tell stories. I loved his reference there too, just on the podcast, being a guest, where he would ask, what was the story that resonated, or what's something that you might take action about. So he's getting that immediate feedback of what are the stories that are resonating, what's capturing people's attention, and so he was able to refine his key stories through that process, through listening, but which comes back to asking the right questions. I think that's a fundamental part that came through. As long as if you're asking the right questions, then you're in a position to in the best position to listen effectively.
Yeah, I want to get back into the earned media side and the podcasts, him being on other people's podcasts, because he had a fair bit to say about that. But just before we jump off the content side, he also has a webinar that he runs every month for his, just trying to think of the name. It's kind of like the ambassadors, ambassadors community. And he's got these webinars that he does every month. He's done 10 times a year. He does them, and I think he's done it for 5 years. So he's done 50 webinars. So there's a fair whack of content right there. But what he does is he asks He's always asking for feedback and ideas and questions from his audience. And he says he's got hundreds and hundreds, I think, maybe even 1,000 responses over the journey. And he's digested those into, chunked them all down into about 20 themes. So he's got a lot of content coming through because he's asking his people all the time the things that they finding challenging, they need addressed, the barriers, the issues to listening, all that sort of stuff. And from what I get out of that, he's, by bringing all that in, clear lesson here, ask your audience what are their pain points and challenges, and then you can create content around that. And he's put it all into a spreadsheet and created themes, and then he goes back to those themes. So that gives them enough longevity. And one webinar a month is a fair clip. And again, that's, they're ambassadors. They're bought into the deep listening side of things, and that's fantastic. And he's about to launch his third book, so that's all content. So we go from his newsletter, his podcast, his webinars that are on per month, and then his books as well. So a good foundation, solid foundations for content. Now let's get into the earned media side, extend the reach of your voice, which he has done very well. As you mentioned, Brendan, he's done 300 interviews on other people's podcasts. What did you think of that?
No, great. And as I said, he being able to ask, develop his chops. He even said, I probably would start focusing on being a guest first, but before starting my own podcast, because you develop you really refine your story, and if you're asking the right questions of your host, etc. And of course, expanding your reach by being exposed to their network. So doing the legwork, he said how he invests in being a guest through an agency. He's getting elevated. He's getting onto bigger and bigger stages. He's very clear about where his audience is. So where he's focused on North America in particular. So using the right. Investing in getting the opportunity to be on the right podcasts. Very important.
Yeah, and let's just extrapolate a little bit on that. You mentioned, Brendan, he's got a podcast agency in America that does the pitches him on that behalf. He's been doing that for years now, and he does 2 a month. So I've had clients who have gone through a similar thing as well. And, there's a lot of people out there who purport to pitch you out. I think if you're going to go down that path, they're representing your brand, your personal brand. So you want to make sure you do your homework and you get someone who's not just, because clearly I've got a podcast, I get pitched all the time, and 95% of them are wrong. 90% of them are wrong. They're not the connect. It's just not there.
I think there's a podcast in that, mate, of what are the do's and don'ts of pitching to a host.
Yep.
It'd be great that, perhaps not right now, but great to tap into your insights on that.
Well, I might talk to the people who do the pitching day to day, but the fact of the matter is that service is available. It's quite a mature market in America particularly. So if you've got a US audience, which Oscar has, then it really works for him. But 300 interviews over a period of time is lots of exposure, and clearly that's helping him. You look at the pathway now, and you get people to download the quiz, and they get onto the email list, and they listen to your podcast. And he's done 100 episodes of the podcast, so that's nice and established as well. So all of these things feed each other. But as I said, your organic content can work by itself, but if you want to start turbocharging a bit, and that's when we had Mickey Kennedy on the other day from eReleases. He was about using the press release and email distribution to a broader marketplace of journalists and editors and producers is one way to really expand your audience. So extend your reach is that part of the credible authority method, and he's doing that quite well. So whether you're doing it yourself or if it's a really important plank of your communications, get someone who specialises in doing it to do it, and they'll. And the good thing is when you're a podcaster, and if someone pitches you a really good guest and it's really worked, when they pitch you again, you're going to listen to them. So it's about them building up that trust and rapport with podcasters. This is the agency, and clearly they've got that. So it's really working. He's getting the guaranteed two a month, and he puts a bit of effort into that as well. And as you said, Brendan, it's helped him refine his story. And I'll just reiterate what you just said a minute ago, that Oscar had said that he probably wishes he did that before he started podcasting, which was interesting because it helped him, get into the zone and refine that voice.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And you gave the example of being reached out to by a Financial Review for a significant story where they could just look at his body of work, his evidence, as the interviews he's done, to know that he was great talent. And so just is a fast track to getting that other earned media exposure and quality exposure. So it's the body of work's right there.
That was a terrific example. I'll let people go back and listen to it, but it just, in short, the Australian Financial Review is kind of like, he likens it, and it is like it's the Australian version of Wall Street Journal. It's the top echelon of business publications here, and they rang him up just before Christmas, wasn't it? And for an interview that went into a pretty big feature, and they'd found him through Google. And page 2 of Google, reminded us to say that, everyone says page 1 is, what's that old saying? If you want to hide a body, you hide it on page 2 of Google. I don't necessarily subscribe to that, but there's your answer on that one. If people are really doing their homework, they'll go a lot deeper. Okay, so we've looked at that side of things. We've got now let's move into probably the final stanza, which is the business of Oscar and his personal brand and what he's been able to do. He did talk about the types of income that he was. The revenue, the sources of revenue. Are you across that, or you want me to? I've got some notes here on exactly.
No, go for it. But having multiple streams is great. He's got a lean operation, so low overheads. He's got some subject experts in the putting the podcast together, handling the website, but the rest is he's able to run with.
And the quiz.
The quiz.
He's got someone handling the quiz. Yeah.
So lean.
Lean and bring people in for those areas of speciality, and particularly to take, the burden off you for having to do everything. That's always the problem as a solopreneur, is what do you hand off and what do you keep? But his streams of income, he's done one-on-one coaching, so he works with leaders on how to become a better listener. He does speaking and workshops, and then he's got author royalties and bulk book sales from his books. So he did say it was a third. So I'm saying a third was coaching, I think speaking and workshops he bundled together, and then royalties and bulk book sales. So he's probably selling quite a few books in that regard. And so a third, and 50% of revenue is now overseas as well. He's got some merchandising, but he says that's more just a long tail sort of stuff there that just trickles along. But yeah, so the one-on-one, the one to kind of many, I suppose, in terms of speaking and workshops, and then having the book, which actually helps with everything else. It helps get you the gigs and builds that credibility. And he's about to launch his third book, How to Listen.
It's never one piece, is it, Trevor? It's all the pieces fit together and build on top and support each other. And he gave another great example of a prospect who had sort of heard him, was going to decided to engage. Thought, I'll talk to him about engaging him as a speaker. Then read the book, discovered his own podcast, and it was not a conversation. The conversation was how much and can you do it, not about the toing and froing. So you just move people through that sales funnel so much because they trust you, they know what you deliver what you're about. You just cut out all of that work, and they're just, I think he specifically said, they're just wonderful conversations where it's just how much and can you do this date.
Yeah. So what we've been doing here is recapping the episode where 226 of the Reputation Revolution, where I interviewed Oscar Trimboli. Go to oscartrimboli.com, I believe it is, and he's the only Oscar Trimboli, and he's an author, a speaker, host of the award-winning podcast Deep Listening. And he's passionate about using the gift of listening to bring positive change in homes, workplaces, and cultures around the world. His new book coming out is How to Listen. And look, if anyone is interested in growing their brand, their personal brand, a professional personal brand, building that sort of thought leadership or expert positioning in the marketplace, whether it's regional or in your own country or global, which Oscar's done, and you want to build a sustainable enterprise around your profile and reputation, this is required listening, Brendan. It's absolutely required listening, because what he's done and the lessons he's learned along the way, he shared all of that stuff. He left nothing out, and that's what life is like now. That's what you can do if you've got that expertise and you're willing to put the work in to build that audience and to grow or develop a level of trust and connection with people en masse. They want to buy from you.
And he rounded out the power of content beautifully by talking about how he made choices about the publisher based on he subscribed to their content and assessed them. And in fact, it was the publisher that featured staff stories, employee stories and he made the point around companies often miss that opportunity, that employees often have a better handle on the brand or more enthusiastic or have a better way of explaining the power of the brand than the corporates can do. So leverage those stories from your people. It does come full circle. So whatever you put out, it's also about how you choose who you engage with. That's right.
Terrific, Brendan. Brendan Keogh, podcastpro.com.au. And I'm just going to double check Oscar's website, because I never know whether it's oscartrimboli.com, as I said. So he's easy to find. So check him out. Check out his podcast, Deep Listening. And Brendan, thanks for being with us. And you'll be back with us, and we'll be dissecting other episodes and recapping and highlighting the lessons for people who want to. Who are on their personal branding journey and who want to learn more and be motivated and inspired to think bigger and to go out there and make that impact.
A pleasure, Trevor. Thanks, everyone.
The reputation economy is here. The world today needs more genuine, credible experts and leaders to stand up and share their experience, their wisdom, their stories and ideas. Are you in?